Everybody okay that they know that. Uh, the thing I'd like to start with, and it's already been stated earlier, but us reviewers, we reviewers, there are a couple who are not here this evening, and other reviewers, Matt Sadowski, Gary Nunn, at least two, is that we're not the list police, and we always try to make that point. Our purpose is to try to make the eBird database as accurate and trustworthy as possible, which is a daunting task. And so if we invalidate a record of yours, if you leave it on your own list and don't remove it yourself, it's still there. It will appear on your top 100 total. It will appear in your hotspot total, et cetera, et cetera. So remember that. So if you agree that the record should be invalidated, you need to remove it. If you disagree with our assessment, uh, there is nothing forcing you to remove it from your own list, but it won't appear then, of course, in eBird data for analysis and future research. Okay. Uh, so again, in addition to myself, Justin Stahl, Bruce Rideout, Jimmy McMorrin, and Brennan Mulrooney are here. A large majority of your county eBird reviewers. I'm going to start by jumping into the fire, and my first topic, and I'll only do one because it's big, is Merlin. And I'm going to now turn off my video so you don't see me anymore. Uh, so Merlin is an incredible resource, both good and not so good. I mean, I'm really impressed. One time it's hearing a Verdon over the hill, which I long since couldn't hear anymore, or waxwings, or my hearing, whatever. And then the next moment, there's a crow cawing over my head, and it won't pick it up. So what's really important with Merlin is it's a great tool, but you really should not submit birds that only Merlin picks up. You really should confirm them yourself. Either, yes, I heard that, or I saw that. And you might say, do I really need to do that even for common birds? And maybe we'll disagree on that. My initial reaction is yes, even for common birds, because Merlin messes up a number of really common birds on a regular basis, which I'll list in a minute. Also, if you're not in your home turf, what you think is common may in fact be rare there. For example, there are no wren tits at Mission Bay. If you're birding Robb Field and Merlin tells you you heard a wren tit, oh, that's a common bird in San Diego, I'll just go with it. Well, there are no wren tits in Mission Bay, and so that's an error. So my recommendation is only if you confirm a bird and don't go with it. But it's a fantastic tool to alert you of what might be nearby that you're not picking up anyway. Anyway, commonly misidentified Merlin birds. Red-winged blackbird is reported by Merlin lots of places where they do not occur, and they are not red-winged blackbirds. Lesser goldfinches are misidentified as American goldfinch, Lawrence's goldfinch, or pine siskin. Merlin, by the way, will tell you that will come up with a bird because it was recorded there at that time, maybe the previous year. So maybe there was a pine siskin invasion a year ago, and it thinks, oh, there were lots of reports here, and so they'll give that to you as a possibility. But in fact, now it's a year where there are no pine siskins or no red-breasted nuthatches, and that would be unusual. Red crown parrot and lilac crown parrot is often just all lumped into red crown parrot. Don't believe Merlin on them. Vireos, Cassins and blue-headed, real problem. Grosbeaks, it keeps jumping back and forth between black-headed and rose-breasted grosbeak. Singing orange-crowned warbler is regularly misidentified as dark-eyed junco. Killdeer causes problems. Mockingbird causes problems. It'll often say it's hearing red-breasted nuthatch when there aren't any in a non-invasion year, and they're probably white-breasted nuthatch or maybe even red-masked parakeets, which give a call like that. Spotted sandpiper gets reported right and left in places there are no spotted sandpipers. Also, kingfisher. But one of the worst ones for us eBird reviewers is Rufus and Allen's hummingbirds. They vocalizations only. They are identifying them as Rufus hummingbirds when we know in a lot of cases there are Allen's hummingbirds. And so we reviewers are getting a lot of poorly documented Merlin only Rufus hummingbirds that are very likely Allen's. So that's my list. Any other reviewers have some other problematic one or any other Merlin do's and don'ts?
Vesper sparrow's another one.
Right. Is that a visual or it's hearing something and it's claiming Vesper sparrow?
Yeah, I think, I don't have my notes with me, but I think it was confusing maybe a particular white-crowned sparrow call. I can't remember now. I have it written down somewhere. But that's a pretty common one.
Oh, another one is Nuttall's woodpecker gets misidentified as belted kingfisher. So kingfishers get reported in far too many places, spotted sandpipers in too many places. Anyway, they're not flagged, so we wouldn't, as reviewers, easily see them unless somebody alerted us to that. Anybody else? Any other reviewer?
You got mine, but I would just add that if you're using Merlin and it's recording and you can cancel that or you can stop the recording and it'll save it. And so generally you should have a recording of any flagged species. And more often than not, when we ask people for justification, like Merlin said it was this, please upload the recording, and they often have discarded the recording. So I don't use it that often, especially not to just generate a list. So I don't know at what stage they're entering the sighting into the eBird app, into the checklist versus, when they're detecting it. But if it's like the end of the day, they've stopped the recording and then that's generated the list and they're putting that into the eBird checklist. At that point, they've presumably saved the file. So I understand that those files, eat up a lot of memory, but if you've got a recording of a flagged individual or flagged species, just upload it before, before a reviewer has to, question you for.
Okay, you froze, Justin, but now you're back. We heard one other one I just remembered again,
okay.
Or maybe I didn't say a singing orange crown warbler is misidentified as dark-eyed junco a lot. Any other reviewers on Merlin? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I would add the lesser goldfinch is, I think, an underappreciatedly fantastic mimic. They can do songs and calls of a lot of common birds, and if you have a singing goldfinch around, it's not just going to misidentified as the wrong goldfinch, but all kinds of different birds could be within their repertoire that could fool Merlin. So look out for that. And then if you look back at what Merlin generates for you, and there are birds in there that are surprising to you, you can just touch the line where that bird is, and it'll jump back into the recording to the point where it thinks it heard it. And then you do what Merlin did yourself. And if you're not hearing it, then maybe that's where you stop with reporting that one.
Good. Okay, any from the audience, any questions? Again, no agreement, don't do that, or your story of a bad, but again, any questions or clarifications? You have a Merlin issue that we didn't cover?
I don't know if I'm doing this right. I unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is Tim Burr. I wondered how Merlin, or if Merlin even utilizes any recordings that are posted to eBird from that area for that species. For instance, if it's if it's hearing a bird singing and it's saying lesser goldfinch, has it already reached back into archives and compared recordings for that particular area?
No, I was involved in the original sort of annotation project. I had to stop for reasons I won't go into, but One of the potential sources of error with Merlin is that it's up to the people doing the annotations, and they're all very experienced recordists and know songs and calls pretty well. But there are a lot of birds that have very similar calls, especially. And it's up to that person doing the annotation to verify that the recording is the correct species. And that is not always the case. And so what can happen, like especially I suspect with Rufus and Allen's hummingbirds, is some of the recordings that Merlin is being trained on are not Rufus hummingbirds. They're actually Allen's hummingbirds that were misidentified. So it's a tricky situation. Another source of error for Merlin, I just wanted to mention, is a lot of people don't realize Merlin doesn't identify birds based on how they sound. They identify based on what the image is on a spectrogram. So if there's noise in the background, if a call note is reverberating through vegetation, it can smear the call note and make it look different. If it's a weak signal, there are all these things that can influence what the signal looks like on a spectrogram that can confuse Merlin. So just be aware of that. It's a great tool, like Paul said, but prone to mistakes.
So if your Merlin recording of, say, a lesser goldfinch has a lot of other things around it, if it's a weak recording, then it could be absorbed in the evaluation of somebody's current recording.
Right.
And then they just say, oh, well, it's a lesser goldfinch. Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so, all right. Next, Justin, what would you like to bring up?
I was just a gentle reminder to include the location of the bird within the hotspot in your description. I think the majority of people are good about this. Coordinates north of the, backstop, west side of Main Street, etc. But just not everybody does that. And I think there can be a great description and a great photo, but if it's at the safari park or the cemetery or, Robb Field, was it out on the mudflat? Was it in the trees behind the soccer field, etc.? So just, yeah, part of the description is where the bird is, in my opinion. So hotspots can be big places.
My addition to that would be lots of people now are solely giving lat long to 8 decimal points. That's the lat long of your phone. It's not the lat long of the bird. So as Justin said, don't just give lat long. Say, man, this bird really is attached to the big sycamore tree right behind the fire hydrant, or something else to help. Because the lat long, if you're too specific, is again where your phone is, not necessarily where the bird was, or providing any helpful info on what the bird was doing, what kind of veg it was on or not in, or whatever. So this is for a rarity. If you're just reporting house finches, who cares? But a rarity that people might like to go see, add some more info.
And I'll just
Paul-
add, with the new ability to add habitat photos, that's a good way to include pictures of trees, or, if it's hard to describe something like the third tree with the broken branch, just like take a photo of that and upload that to the habitat photos and then reference that in the bird description. That photo shouldn't go under the bird because it's not a picture of the bird, but the habitat photos are useful for, giving people not there a sense of where the bird was.
Justin and Paul, Susan Smith has her hand raised.
Yeah, it was back to oh, by the way, let me say, if you forget something, we've moved on to another topic. Write it down. At the end, there'll be a sort of free for all where you can bring up topics you forgot to, a question you forgot from earlier, but we do want to move things along. So if you forget at the appropriate time, just keep track of it. And any new topic that we didn't bring up, again, at the end, there'll be sort of a wide open Q&A as well. Okay, Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up an issue we encounter fairly often, which is false precision in counts of large numbers of birds. I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but it's, like I say, a pretty common problem. The basic concept is when you're going to submit your checklist, the total number that you're going to enter for any given species should not be more precise than the crudest estimate that went into it. So just a quick example, if you're walking along the beach and you encounter a flock of Western sandpipers and you count them, say by tens, and come up with a rough estimate of 200 birds, if you then a short ways up the beach encounter 4 more, you don't include those 4 in your total count when you submit your checklist because it's already within the margin of error. If you're a typical birder, your margin of error for any large number of birds that you count is probably going to be around 20%. If you're really good at counting birds, it might be 10%, but there's still a significant margin of error there. So you don't add to that estimate of 200 birds until you exceed the margin of error, which if you're good would be 20 birds. So just be aware of that. We very often see these counts of like 793 birds, as if somebody very carefully counted each bird individually and they're sure there were exactly that many. So if you do that, you're probably going to get an email from me. So just be aware of that.
My additional comment to that would be, okay, you run into a flock, of 300 black-bellied plovers on Stint Island. Not only are we off by 20%, we almost always are undercounting by 20% more than over, but there are some overcounters out there. Instead of just doing one eyeball at the flock and saying 300, and you may be wrong by 100, spend a little time, maybe do groups of 10, bing, 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 or through the flock, and you'll end up with, 370. And then in your comments say counted by tens. And then that's fine. 370 counted by tens. So that's better than doing a gross estimate of the whole flock because we really are bad at gross estimates of entire flocks. Yeah, Bruce?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, that's a really good point that when people enter large counts that get flagged, give your count method. I mean, everybody ought to be used to this by now. And we don't really, I don't think, have that many problems with you on this call, but there are a lot of birders that come to San Diego all the time. And it's just amazing when eBird is prompting them about a high count, we'll get comments like they were everywhere. Like that's supposed to help me verify how many birds they actually saw. So just do what Paul said, indicate a count method so we know, how to interpret your count.
And I would just add to that, like on that topic, like don't be afraid of the high count being flagged. People worry about high counts and they overestimated the number of birds there. But I think if people have this like sort of filter fear, there's a potential that people are chronically undercounting birds. And I don't want to say that's the reason that, bird population estimates are in decline everywhere, but it's certainly something that gets discussed by a lot of people. Like if people are afraid to trip a high count filter, all the counts are going to be, skewed low. And so it's just as simple as giving, your methodology for how you arrived at that number. Did you count one by one as they flew by during a sea watch? You could potentially get, 734, but more than likely it was groups of 5 and 7 and just, talk about how you arrived at that number. My pet peeve, I think, is when people just say conservative estimate for 700, and it's like, well, but how did you do that? Was it by tens or 100, or did you just look at it and eyeball it and say, it's about 700?
Okay. Brennan, like to bring up something?
Actually, Justin stole mine. I was going to talk about adding locations to hotspot lists. Something that came up today, though, there was a bird reported that person was unsure of their identification, and in situations like that, and it gets tricky if it's a rare bird or possibly a rare bird because what I'm suggesting is there's things like spuzz and slashes that I think are probably underused. And you don't maybe know that they're there, but a lot of the birds that we have in the county that have birds that are similar, dowitchers or Jaegers or a lot of different groups, you can put down gull spa or warbler spa or things like that. So just be aware that that's there to use, so you're not just leaving birds off of your list because you're not quite sure what they are. If it's possibly a rare bird, then the tricky part there is if you do that, it doesn't trigger a filter and it maybe doesn't get reviewed. So in that case, you could report it as the rarity that you think it might be, and then just put in your notes, unsure, wanting to get this reviewed. And if I'm speaking incorrectly about that, maybe one of the other reviewers will let me know, but that's what I would suggest on that.
One thing I would add, if it's a potential rarity and you want to get the news out and it's not 100%, but it's likely, you think it is, if you took photos of it, don't wait 4 hours till you get home to finally upload the photos to your eBird list if it's a potential really cool rarity. Do a back of camera phone shot of the picture, and then if you know how to load the photo then and there from your phone to your eBird list, then it's out there immediately and people can know what to do. Rather, I can't tell you the number of times there have been great birds that turned out to be correct, that the person said, well, I had to wait to get home to look at my photos and then add them to the list, and that was the difference between seeing the bird and having it, vanish. Okay, Jimmy?
We got some hands up, Paul.
Oops.
Oh, okay.
Lisa,
Yeah,
Lisa. I
sorry.
see.
Yeah, if there are questions, I didn't know there would be so questions either on estimating numbers, high counts, or this whole thing about maybe species and quick photo uploads. Any questions on those? Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Do you guys mind if we flag our own photos if we're not sure of something and we have a photo? So it gets reviewed, like if it's not rare, maybe?
I personally dislike that approach just because there's so many other resources out there for, what is this bird? If it's a potential rarity, sure. But if I'm not sure if this is a Lincoln sparrow or a juvenile song sparrow, just put it on the listserv. I mean, put it in Sparrow Spa and then send it to the public, because bird identification is a community practice, I think, and shouldn't be, solely put on eBird reviewers.
Yeah, I guess I kind of always thought that the San Diego Region birding list, that you guys didn't really like ID questions on there. You're okay with that?
I think they're fine.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So back, Jimmy, did you have any?
Sure. Yeah, you guys have kind of already touched on it a bit. It has to do with photos and with checklists. I'm guilty of it at times too. Photo to be added, PH, however you want to word it. If it does go into the eBird review queue, those will sit in there and not get accepted until a picture is attached to the record. So getting a picture on to your checklist as soon as possible is desired in instances like, for example, today, like even back of camera images. It doesn't have to necessarily be the rarest thing in the world, but there's a lot of people who have different lists they're keeping, 5-mile radius or for whatever reason. Northern water thrush, for example, it's not rare, but there could be somebody in the neighborhood who's never seen one. So just adding a little something immediately once it's the alert, if you do get a photo, at least shows them like, okay, this was a water thrush. It wasn't a song sparrow they're reporting as a water thrush. So just getting photos. If you say you have photos, upload them at your earliest convenience, because that does it adds on to the overwhelming records that get entered into the eBird queue to be reviewed daily. So and with that, again, it's just a matter of if it is something that does get flagged, that could be an instance where a backup camera shot, like Paul is suggesting, it at least lets people know that it actually is a species and they aren't going blindly after a bird that isn't there. in a nutshell, I guess. That's it.
Since Jimmy brought up the photos, I do have a related thing on photos. In addition to the back of camera, if you know you're going to be delayed, and this, so if you're traveling out of state, and it'll take you a while, or even here, it's just going to really take a while for the photos to appear, and it's not a rarity. But if you say photos, say it's going to, photos in a couple days or something, just so we know we're not expecting them that day, even in a few hours. And then when you do add the photos, then remove that part of the thing where you said in a few days I'll add photos. But I will say that the worst thing that you can put in your comments, in my book, and it drives most reviewers nuts, is photos available on request. Don't make us write you to ask for the photos. If you took a photo, I don't, and you want to include, and if it's a rarity, it's something that requires validation, you obviously need to include the photos. Don't say that you took them and then ask us to write you to say, well, then please add them. So that's done fairly regularly, and it just adds extra work that's uncalled for. Thank you for my soapbox complaint. Okay.
Audrey has a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Bruce, about the margin of error, you had tried to explain this to me before, and I guess I'm wondering, in the context of a formal survey, if you are very carefully counting those 370 individuals and you leave the immediate area, it's not their behavior to say move to the next half mile, and you're not double counting, do you not add those 4 individuals in your example earlier? I'm still not quite understanding why you wouldn't add those 4 to the count.
Here's a story that might help. It's an extreme example. Picture a natural history museum, and they have a beautiful Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton. And a visitor to the museum is admiring it, and she asks the museum docent, how old is this T-Rex skeleton? And the docent says, it's 65 million and 7 years. And the visitor says, holy cow, that's amazing. How could they know so precisely what the age is? And the docent says, well, they told me it was 65 million years old when I started here 7 years ago. So that shows you, like, it's nonsense, because it can't possibly be that precise of an age. Somebody's adding too precise of a number onto a crude estimate. So the answer is no, you don't count those 4 birds until you keep track of them in case you continue to encounter birds, but you don't add them to that total until it exceeds your idea of what your margin of error is. So that's why, for example, when you get a shared pelagic checklist from me, you'll see a lot of counts that'll say 350 black-vented shearwaters. I might have had 353 in my notes, but I'm going to round that off to 350, because it's just nonsense to say I had 353, and if I counted them again, would get 353. So read the account in the eBird help page. I think Justin linked to it in the chat. It's a great description. They've got other tips on counting large numbers of birds. They have examples. It's really, really a well done article. I encourage everybody to read it.
I guess I would add the question as asked was, if my count though of 350 was an exact 1-by-1 count, and then I go a half mile away and see 5 more, then the answer is yes, you can make it 355. But only if your initial count, the larger number, was an absolute accurate, no, approximation.
Yeah, I would argue, though, that it's almost never going to be the case that you could count 350 birds in the field and get it exactly right and know that if you counted them 2 or 3 more times, you'd get exactly 350. I mean, think about it. If you were selling something and somebody handed you $351 bills, you'd count them several times and you might not get 350 every single time.
I would just add that I don't think on either the reviewer end or the observer end, that's a terribly big deal, because I think the data from an analysis standpoint generally gets kind of binned together anyway, like 350, 360, 370. Effectively, those are all the same number. Like there were a lot of black-vented shearwaters compared to one. The difference between 0 and 1 is, nearly infinite, like presence absence. The difference between 1 and 2 is pretty significant, but 3 to 5 and then 10 to 12. And then once you get up into talking about hundreds, like we had 700 pink-footed shearwaters. The next day we had 800. Like, were there more? Like, yes, but really not. There were just a lot of pink-footed shearwaters out there. So I don't know. I would move to just close that topic for the rest of the day.
All right, I just have one last thing on photos, and then we'll go to a totally new topic, and that is, it doesn't really affect the reviewers, but some people will put in 12 photos of the same bird where 5 or 6 would do, or 2 would do. If photos don't show other characters, different angles, different lighting, or that half the photos are far worse quality than the best 4 or 5, think twice about including them all. What it does do for the reviewers is we then have to look at all 12 photos to make sure they're correctly identified. And if you only do 3 or 4, which totally is enough, that would help streamline it a little bit. But so minor point, but a few people locally are known to do that, and it does add a little extra time.
So there's a question in the chat from Chris that says, I hope it's okay that I read this. It says direct message. Are you all volunteers? I've wondered how the reports are separated. Do you do San Diego and someone else does East County? How are the reports reviewed? How do you know who reviews which reports? How many hours approximately does it take all of you each week? I will just start by saying it's kind of a free-for-all, really. I mean, I think a lot of areas, things do get divided up in other regions. Like it's either done taxonomically, like you do water birds, I'll do land birds, or you do the mountains, I'll do the coast. But I think it's just as people have time, they look at the queue, and in case you've never seen this, I think I tried to share a screenshot of this when I gave an eBird talk a few years ago, but it can be sorted taxonomically or by alphabetically, but the default is reverse chronological order. So the most recent report. So if it's 644, somebody reported a rare bird, that would be the very first thing we see in the queue. And there's only 25, I think, by default shown on a page. So when people email us and say, my report from yesterday wasn't reviewed, and it's during the bird festival, and there's literally 500 rare bird reports coming in from shared checklists every day, like, it takes time. And so I don't know how the other guys approach it, but I basically just open up the queue and start like working down from the top to get those most recent things cleared out. Hours spent, I don't know. I should have kept track of that at some point. I think eBird knows how many records we've reviewed manually. So I could tell you I've confirmed 30,000 or something like that, but I don't know what the time investment is. Try to do, 30 minutes a day if I can. Others want to ask or try to answer that question? How much time you spend?
Well, it's gratis. We don't get paid anything. And I'd say in San Diego County, it's, in my experience, all the reviewers, it's pretty much random what you do. It's not divided by, maybe if there's a pelagic trip and Bruce did the list, he pays extra attention to any problems resulting from that show up in the queue. But otherwise, it's as Justin said, as we can get to it. I don't know about others. I'll spend up to an hour a day, and there are pages and there's 50 pages because people will do ancient stuff, or there's certain groups that are just inherently horrible, like lilac crown and red crown parrots that are sitting there, pages full of them. or salt, so, desert sparrows, sagebrush and bell sparrows. There are certain species that, and none of us want to deal with them. They're just so they sit there forever. While other things, like a Blackburnian warbler, fine, we'll deal with that, quickly. But so just be aware that some species sit longer, and especially if you put things in from days ago, it goes back several pages worth, and we may not even see it unless we scroll back several pages worth of review queue birds. So my next topic, because it was just mentioned, shared lists. Please, those of you submitting shared lists, carefully proof them. Any mistakes made on a shared list gets spread amongst all the people who then accepted your list. Either the number, you have fat fingers or something and you put 2 and it should have been 1. That's a common error people do when they're doing phone eBird data entry. Photos, again, misidentified, put in the wrong hotspot or whatever. A pet peeve I have is that a shared list then therefore means 15 people have that data. To me, the totals that are submitted should be the group's totals. So what often happens is one person volunteers to be in charge of a shared list, and then they submit just their own totals. There's no attempt made when you leave that area to say, hey, everybody, let's go down the list, and here's my suggested numbers. Would anybody like to add anything to it? Because then you end up with 15 people submitting totals that are really only one person's totals. Another thing is if only 1 or 2 people in the group saw a rarish or scarce bird, it would probably be better that they don't put it on the shared list. When you get the list, then you personally add it to your one list. Otherwise, 15 lists will have the rarity instead of only 1. And eBird uses the number of lists a bird appears on, which can skew the abundance of a bird. It gets if 500 people went and saw the white-winged tern this summer, that becomes one of the commonest tern species ever seen in San Diego, and of course there's only one record ever. So be really careful on those shared lists. The protocol, make them as accurate as possible. I know people happily have the one person do it because then they don't have to. They're a little lazy or they're pressed for time or whatever, but it really should be a group effort. Others, they disagree with that, but
No, I'll just clarify that shared checklists count as a single checklist for those abundance kind of concerns, which, like, the classic example is if you look at your targets, like your county targets, or you're traveling to Panama and you're looking at what the most likely birds you're going to see are, those percentages are based on the number of complete checklists that bird appears on. So if you see, rufous-finted ground cuckoo 25%, that means 25% of the complete checklists reported from Panama have rufous-finted ground cuckoo on them. So there's a fairly good chance you're going to see that bird. Now, if you look locally, Brennan's shaking his head because it's probably more like 0.025%. But if you look locally, like, what are my targets for October? What birds in October would be county birds for me, or county year birds, or whatever? And you look at those percentages, like if you missed something like lesser frigate bird for me, for example, that shows up at a fairly high percentage because there were a lot of checklists for that bird submitted, but that bird was seen all up and down the coast. So that makes sense that, it was being reported kind of independently, or quote unquote, all up and down the coast. But if you go to, Carmel, whatever park, and there's a Cape May warbler, or the flammulated owl is the classic example. Everybody that saw that bird was largely looking through a telescope that was being held in place by one person. And I don't think any of those observations truly count as an independent report. Like, that should all, in theory, just be one checklist because you weren't independently finding that bird. The bird didn't move. It was this sort of like spoon feeding kind of thing. And so really, more or less, there should be just a few checklists for that. Maybe Joe's initial one and then everybody that went to see it later should arguably be a shared checklist, because now if you didn't see the flammulated owl, that's like the number one most likely rarity in San Diego County for your targets, just based on how the math of that works out. So if you're at a stakeout and someone else is there, I would encourage you to share a checklist with them. And it offers you an opportunity to meet a friend, get that person's name or embarrassing username, and go from there.
Okay. So Justin, new topic?
Tracks, since tracks have been rolled out, I think there's some argument as to whether or not they eat battery life. I'm not sure. I haven't really seen any impact of it. But one thing that's really great is that it is, as long as your battery doesn't die, it is accurately counting unique distance. So the issue with estimating unique distance is if you go up a trail for a mile and you come back down that same trail and you're literally stepping in your footsteps, you will have walked 2 miles, but it's only 1 mile that you've walked uniquely. And if you are not double counting birds, but you're not correcting your effort, you're gonna deflate the overall abundance of that species. So if you walk out a mile and you see 10 birds, then there's 10 birds per mile. But if you turn around and walk back and see no new birds and you report it as 2 miles, then it's 5 birds per mile because you're dividing 10 by 2. And the tracks just take that completely out of your hands and allow the computer to estimate your overlap. So I would encourage everybody to use tracks as much as possible. Obviously, if you're on a long distance backpacking trip or something, you might not want to do that. But in those cases, breaking it up into smaller increments is encouraged in any case. But if you're using tracks, there's no real reason, I don't think, to modify the distance. So I still see people manually doing that, which is fine. But if you had the track enabled, there's no reason to modify your distance anymore. If you're not using tracks, you definitely need to kind of keep aware of your unique distance that you've traveled.
And
Generally, if you're out and back, you're dividing by 2. But if it's some like lollipop shaped thing, there's a little bit of voodoo required to figure out how far you actually went.
yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on that topic. I know on Facebook, a lot of people were aggravated by this and they didn't understand the concept. And one of the things to be aware of, another problem with out and back routes is not knowing necessarily what to count on the way back. It can be challenging, even for very experienced birders. There's a simple solution: do 2 checklists. Do one on the way out, one on the way back. It's better data. You've got a smaller time span. It's a simple way to go. And that way, if you're interested in having your total distance recorded, you've got it. It's in 2 checklists, but at least it's there.
Okay. Any questions from the audience on either shared lists or distance?
This
All
is
right,
Lori
Jenny?
Andrews.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with a real quick
Yeah.
question? Can you just remind us how far we should go and as a distance before we close that checklist and start a new one? Let's say we're on, in a big hot spot and we're walking a long distance. What's your guidelines for that?
The 2 rules of thumb I use are until you change habitat types, or 5 miles. And so if you're out in the desert and you're just walking through creosote scrub, 5 miles would probably be my cutoff. Partly because of what Bruce said, like those more fine scale data is always better. Short duration, short time is always preferred. Stationary 5-minute counts are really valuable because it's like a quick snapshot of what's there. But if you're changing habitats also, like if you get above tree line and suddenly you're, in the alpine, Paramo, and you're not in rainforest, cloud forest anymore, like you want to switch checklists. You don't want to go through 5 different habitat types and plot it all at the lodge, so to speak. But around here, it's the mountains, mountain desert interface, those kind of places. I think in an urban environment, it's probably fairly uniform. Even if you leave a park, if the neighborhoods are vegetated, I would argue that that's still kind of similar habitat. I don't know if anybody, Bruce or somebody else, want to add to that?
No, I agree.
Okay.
All
There's
right, new question.
I have a
quick question. Okay,
Oh,
there's
Sorry.
I was just to say there's a question in the chat. Let me ask first, and then we'll jump to the next one. So there's a report or question is, should you not report an identified rarity to an eBird checklist at a personal home if you're not wanting a lot of people to show up to see it? And I would say,
that's gonna be covered in a sec.
okay, we'll come back to that then.
Okay.
Unless,
Jimmy or Brendan, either one. New topic, either of you guys?
Timber's hand is up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. What is this? I guess I didn't sign in until about 5 after 6, but this track, is that something you enable in your eBird checklist? And is it on the mobile, or do you have to do it on your, on your desktop?
it's default, should be default on the app. If you turn on the eBird app, like it records your time and distance.
And it'll show it to you on a map. You can see it.
Yeah, that's the track part. Yeah.
And
I
that's
turned
and
that
that's
on
private.
before.
That's only visible to people on that shared checklist. Reviewers can't see where you were.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so rarities. Oh, no, sorry, Jimmy or Brendan, any new
Go ahead,
topic?
Bruce.
Yeah, I just had a quick one I wanted to bring up. It seems to be increasingly common for people, especially if they're chasing a rarity, to upload any photo or any recording they can get, thinking they have to have that in order to get that rarity on their checklist. The problem for us as reviewers and for eBird as a database is if you upload a non-diagnostic recording or photo, you're putting us in a bind, because if we approve that, it goes into the Macaulay archive as a verified ID on that media, and then Merlin can use that for training. And if all we've got is a blurry image of a bird that we can't identify, or a recording that's nothing but handling noise, it's just, don't do that. Don't upload a photo or recording unless it's a decent, diagnostic quality image. So just, one of my issues that I encounter pretty often.
Okay, I have sort of three things all related to reporting rarities. We talked about it earlier already with back of camera photos to get those out sooner than later. But one is, don't forget the listserv. As time has gone on, the San Diego region listserv, if you're out in the field, you have a rarity, but it's going to be a while till you get home to download your photo, because that's what you'll do, and do your eBird list. Please consider using the region listserv. Fewer and fewer people contribute to it. The numbers keep going down. Everybody's migrated to eBird only. And I think that's one of the big downsides of eBird, to be honest. So that would be a timely way of getting the news out. And then if you do that, and if it's a mega rarity, then of course also use the WhatsApp group if you've joined that through Justin. But please promptly report rarities that people would like to see, and don't forget the listserv as a timely way of doing it. Number two is birds that have been around a while. People, of course, their details become the single word we see all the time, continuing, and that's all they say. Most of the time, that's fine. However, if there is a bird that's been around a while, and then it does not go reported for some, and I'll say appreciable length of time, which is a rather loose term, if you then think you saw it, saying continuing is not enough. And I can't tell you the number of times that stakeout rarities get reported beyond the date that they actually left. And this happens everywhere. And so it could be a spring or fall migrant. Let's say the Cape May warbler that was around for quite a while, the Carmel Valley, which, by the way, I have not seen a report of it now in 5 days or so. If you went there tomorrow and said Cape May warbler continuing, that wouldn't be enough because there's been a 5-day delay on a bird that should probably migrate and probably not wintering, though it could. It's even more the case on a winter stakeout that, let's say you're getting to February, March, early April, and it could leave any time and nobody reports it for a week or two. And all of a sudden you report it 1 or 2 weeks after the previous report. Just saying continuing is not enough. Please provide details. Great with a photo. Yes, it's still there, but it's been too long a gap of time. And last but not least is, in fact, the question that somebody just brought up, and that is, if there is a rarity that may generate a fair amount of interest, and it's at a site that's private or sensitive or borderline could become an issue, think long and hard about publicizing it in an eBird list. You might want to hide your list, at least wait a week before submitting it so it won't appear on the rare bird alert. If in doubt, privately contact any of us reviewers. What should I do? Et cetera, et cetera. Do not underestimate the number of people who will show up to see a rare bird. I have been shocked by the number of people who went and saw a bird that I thought would only generate, that, let's say I found, that was on property that was borderline. I was a little worried, not blatantly private. And I said, 5 people, 7, whatever, and 80 people later, the, eBird lists. And it's not only binoculars, so many people now have big cameras. And think about it, if it's somebody's home, their yard, it's a street where people aren't used to birders. If it's an apartment complex, it's where kids are walking to school. If you're out there or people with binoculars and cameras, it's going to be bad, and you may lose access to a place that you've had access to for a long time. Again, I cannot tell you the number of birds that I did publicize that in hindsight I maybe shouldn't have, because the number of people who show up, it's just increasing as years go on. And again, it's also with big cameras, and that gets people in their neighborhoods with their kids walking to school quite nervous. So anyway, those are mine.
I had 2
Yeah,
things
go
to
ahead.
add, but I don't want to hog the mic. So if anybody else wants to jump in, please do. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To Paul's point about continuing, and that's generally okay. I would just remind people that the rare bird alert, it's only 7 days long. And so if you're traveling, and this is San Diego, I've got friends who I haven't talked to in 20 years that are, I'm at a conference in San Diego. It's like this is a premier destination for travel and also birding. People look at the rare bird alert, or they look at their targets, like what's around that I can see. And if they just see a list of continuing, like that doesn't give them any information. So to my, I think, opening point about location within the description, I mean, at least put continuing at these coordinates, continuing at the northwest backstop of the Little League field, something like that. Everybody in San Diego may have seen it 20 times, but the guy from Phoenix, hasn't seen it yet. So just keep that in mind. And then to a little more about the question about, you're concerned about a sensitive location or a rare bird in your yard. 2 things is the rare bird alert, again, only goes back 7 days. So if you wait 7 days, that's not going to generate any alerts. If it gets reviewed and accepted, it'll show up on the map, but it won't like send an email to everybody on the continent's, inbox with rare bird alert. So you can wait. And also you can just intentionally, falsify the location. Just don't plot it in your yard, plot it at the intersection, a block over or something like that. But if you're doing that on a temporary basis, people will go to no ends to figure out, kind of who you are and where you are. And if that's like a one-off location, they'll try to figure out where you live. So if you're concerned about privacy, I would certainly wait 7 days to report it.
Okay, new topic, Justin?
I'll pass for now, unless so let
Yeah,
somebody else go.
Bruce?
No, I think I'll pass. I don't know if we're gonna let any freewheeling questions come rolling out.
Oh yeah, but we'll go. This will probably go till 7:30. I have two more I want to bring up. Brennan or Jimmy, any new topics?
No, you covered mine.
Okay. All right. The two I'd like to bring up. One is breeding status, breeding codes. It's a two-edged sword. Some of you don't use them at all. If you look under, details, you can go to breeding, and it gives you can just click on, nest with young, uh, carrying food, carrying nesting material, etc. So use them carefully. A lot of people don't. But the flip side is don't use them when they're not valid. A bird with a couple pieces of grass in its bill, in January may not be building a nest. So don't say it's building a nest. And the other thing is some behaviors, just because a bird is singing doesn't mean it's a breeding code. Birds singing, a yellow-rumped warbler that winter that is certainly not going to breed in San Diego in the lowlands, is singing in March and early April before it heads north. Well, don't, of course, use that as a breeding code, singing for a yellow-rumped before it leaves. And inappropriate habitat is one that has really been misused sometimes. And we joke about some are really bad. A yellow-rumped was in a tree. And therefore, that's appropriate habitat because tree is where they breed. Anyway, that's getting silly, but that's actually been done. So a thing on breeding codes is use them when appropriate. Be really careful that you don't overuse them. But some people, a lot of you, underuse them. So be aware that easy little list of options you can click on to help add some breeding information. And the next one could be a major topic, and I think there'll be definite disagreement even amongst us reviewers, perhaps. But just so you know that it's something to think about, and that is the overuse of subspecies, claiming that you are identifying a bird to subspecies. I am not a fan of including subspecies determinations based solely on range, that's where you are. Because by so doing, you are putting in eBird circular reasoning that, well, the brown pelicans here are California brown pelicans, even though there are some out of range pelicans from a different subspecies possible. But yeah, the chances that the brown pelicans you're seeing are California is 99.9%. But you then Merlin or eBird uses that data to then generate range maps showing the range of California brown pelicans. So you're using data that is all by supposition to then define what the subspecies range is. I have a couple sort of sayings, which is, false precision is bad. And particularly don't report birds at a finer level of detail than you actually collected the data at in the field. If you didn't identify it as that. And so what that's done is people who do properly identify the species to subspecies based on plumage, vocalizations, their data has now been drowned out by all the subspecies reports that are based solely on what should be there on range. It's a pet peeve of mine. Even the folks at eBird Central at Cornell don't agree with me, but do really think about it twice. Be careful with your subspecies. One bird that's reported to subspecies a lot in San Diego that I would recommend taking one step back and not doing it as often because it is more complicated than people think is orange-crowned warbler. Just leave them as orange crown warbler. If a researcher, by the way, in the future wants to do a study of brown pelican subspecies, she can, if they want, take all the California brown pelican reports and call them California brown pelicans. That's their choice. But I wouldn't do it, based on just, likelihood.
And
All right.
that's exactly what they
You'll
did
all
with
disagree
California
with me.
scrub jay. Western scrub jay, just to poke at Paul here, when it was Western scrub jay, Paul would get upset if we put California Western scrub jays, but once it was split, the odds of Woodhouse's scrub jay on the coast are infinitesimal. So it's okay to report them as California scrub jays post split. But anyway, do be careful with your subspecies, and especially the migratory ones. Gray crowned or gray-headed orange crown warbler is preferred to Salata or Oristera because those two intergrade. Be careful with your juncos. Don't just assume that all the yellow rump warblers are Audubon, or if they have a pale throat that they're myrtle. I mean, it's an interesting thing, but yeah, don't make too many assumptions out there.
Fox sparrow is another problematic one. I see a hand up for Sally Beach.
Yes. Can you hear me? Sorry, it was for the continuing question. Took me a while to figure out how to get the hand up. So do you want me to wait to the end?
No, go ahead.
So on continuing, how much description of the bird, other than location when it was first found, if I take a lot of photos, how much of a description do you still want?
If you have good photos of a continuing bird, but yeah, it's been a gap in time. Well, heck, if it's even not a gap, you had it while everybody else is seeing it, I'm sure you'd like to include a photo you got of it. But if it's after a gap, even for sure include either photo or written details if there's a fair gap. 4
No,
or
yeah,
5 days
my-
is a
my
fair
question-
gap on a fall migrant when nobody else has reported it. And certainly a week or 2 is a fair gap on a wintering bird when it becomes late winter and stuff starts disappearing, anyway.
It's not the gap, it was more how much description of what the bird, it's the description of the bird itself if I have a lot of photos on a continuing bird.
Well, most people don't include any written details if they have photos anymore, which is a trend. We can bemoan or say fine, but that's what happens anyway.
Okay.
Just remember, photos don't show behavior. They don't show audio. I mean, it's a still image. So if there's tail wagging, if there's, hopping versus walking, those kind of things, like those things that aren't captured in the photo are helpful. I don't think it's necessarily important to, and it's sort of misleading to get home and look at your photo and then write the description from that. Like I generally try to just put very cursory notes that I saw through my binoculars and then add the photo. But there's no reason to then edit it to just add things that were only visible from the photo. And something we should have started with is these are best practices for international, birding. A lot of the people on this call, I think, are probably plugged into the listserv. They're plugged into the local eBird community. There's sightings are taken, whatever the opposite of a grain of salt is. It's like the benefit of the doubt is given to people we know. People coming from out of town, we have no idea what their skills are. And same can be said of you when you go somewhere else. So just, you might get away with continuing here, but you might not get away with that somewhere else because nobody knows who you are. And I don't mean to play favorites, but it's just like, well, I know Sally's seen an American redstart before because I saw her photos last week. Like, I'll assume that she got this one right, but I don't know who, Tom Jones is.
I have another topic. Is any other reviewer, because I'm hogging it at the moment, or are you out? This is, I think, Justin will jump in and say how important this is. I'm not aware, but whether you note your list as being complete or incomplete has very important ramifications on how eBird uses the data. And far too many people with a grossly incomplete list call it complete. And examples are especially, let's say you chase a rarity. You go to the spot, Robb Field in the San Diego River mouth, you go see or miss, as the case may be, a yellow-throated warbler. You high-five your friends, and then you spend the rest of your time talking with your friends, because it's great seeing everybody who descended on the yellow-throated warbler. You might walk over because somebody said, oh, the tropical kingbird is. So you then submit a complete list, that has yellow-throated warbler and tropical kingbird on it and maybe 2 other birds. But that's a gross misstatement of, and you were there an hour, so you should have been if you were there an hour, you should have had a whole lot of water birds and land birds on your list. So it's not just chasing rarities, but it's just general birding. Be really careful on whether you say it's a complete or incomplete list. I do a lot of incomplete lists, and I'm not ashamed of it. And okay, they're not going to use the data in many ways that if I did a complete list. I just visit too many places in a morning to do complete lists for everyone. I just don't have the time. But chasing rarities and then spending your time just standing around looking at the one bird or talking with your friends is not a complete list. Justin, what is the ramifications and how eBird uses that?
Well, I mean, those things, both lists get used. I mean, presence, absence data, it's like, yes, there was a yellow-throated warbler there. It'll show up on the map. Yellow-throated warbler occurs in California, etc. But the relative abundance is lost in terms of if it's not a complete list. Those bar charts you see, that when I first started birding, there's the charts in the book where a thin line was, rare, dots was occasional, and then as it got thicker, it was more likely to be seen. And those are the percentages you see in those target lists. Those are based on complete lists. With the exception of if that bird hasn't been recorded in that week, then an incomplete list will fill in that bar chart, but it'll only be a thin line. I would definitely encourage you to do complete lists. My kind of rule of thumb is 5 minutes. I don't think 1 minute stationary is really an accurate sense of what you're seeing, typically because the bird that causes you to start the checklist in the first place, like, oh, there's a tropical kingbird in my yard, I'm gonna start this eBird checklist, 1 minute stationary. I would encourage you to at least do it for 5 minutes. Most people birding are out longer than that. But yeah, if your primary purpose was catching up with everybody after high-fiving, then I would say you're no longer birding at that point. And that should just be an incomplete checklist. There's nothing wrong with incomplete lists. Like Paul said, if you hit 5 parks in a morning and you're really just looking for rarities and not counting all the house finches and deciding if it's a Rufus or Allen's hummingbird, just, mark your summer tanager incomplete, move on.
Justin, this is Nancy Christensen. On that note, though, when you're birding a hotspot, you rarely cover the entire hotspot. So it's not like you're required, if you're trying to do a complete checklist, that you have to bird the entire hotspot. It's what you were able to identify where you actually birded.
Absolutely. No, you're totally correct. You can go to Robb Field, and that's a tricky thing. We kind of argued about that with the hotspots, is you can go to Robb Field and walk the ukes around the athletic fields looking for warblers and vireos and stuff, and totally ignore the river. And yeah, that's going to make it look like those, Dunlin and great blue herons and stuff weren't present. But if your track's on, it'll show that you weren't in that habitat. And also that's the most, I think, visited hotspot in San Diego. So it comes out in the wash. Most people, I think, are there looking at the water birds anyway. So the kind of sense of what occurs there is fairly well established. But yeah, you don't have to cover a whole hotspot to, I mean, that's, yeah, it's impossible. I mean, you're missing birds whether you cover the whole thing or not. It's a sense of what you saw in that time and in that distance.
Okay.
We got
I have just
2 more questions. Tim,
Oh, sorry.
I saw you had your hand up still, or again?
Yeah, again, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
I was, well, one pet peeve of mine is with eBird and has nothing really to do with the eBird reviewers. So we won't really need to go into that. But the second thing is, if I can do a good recording from my backyard, oftentimes I just submit that recording as an incomplete list. Are there downsides to doing that?
No, that's totally fine, especially if you've got media. I mean, that's extra. I mean, the way media is being used versus like, you know, the data of the bird presence or the count are kind of separate things, you know, like
Yeah.
Macaulay Library is going to train AI on and Merlin on the photos you put in. The Cornell University might use your photo for their magazine or something like that. If you have high quality media, it's totally fine to just put that in as a incomplete or incidental checklist. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that it's better if you have a complete checklist, but there's nothing wrong with incomplete lists.
Yeah.
And I would add that it's better to upload that recording as an incomplete checklist rather than not upload the recording.
Yeah, that's what I
A word on recordings though is I defer usually on recordings to Bruce and others. Matt Sadowski was not here this evening, but it would really help if you have a 3-minute recording and the bird only calls once or twice somewhere in the middle of that 3 minutes, edit the recording down to 10 seconds, or 2, if you don't know how to do that, in the comments say the bird appears at 1 minute 34 seconds so that the reviewer doesn't have to painstakingly listen to all 3 minutes just trying to catch, one call note somewhere in that 3 minutes. So that would really help the reviewer.
Yeah, that's a good
One
tip.
other little, Bruce.
Well, I was just going to say, it's one of my issues that I encounter all the time is super short recordings. We really need context. Very often an ambiguous song can be identified to species by picking up the call notes in between the song phrases. There's all kinds of, tricks, but just, there's no reason to do a 5-second recording. Just let it run, get a good long recording with a number of different call notes or song phrases. It really helps.
Yeah, I recall at a Cornell sound recording workshop that a minimum of a minute was what they were asking for, and 3 minutes is ideal, because even during that 1 minute, or you will get more than one call type or more than one song type. And that would have the ability of the reviewer to confirm your identification.
And I put a link to the kind of sound recording tips in there. Yeah, it's not only call type and song type, it's the spacing between those things. And so the longer the better if it's a good recording. If it's just for simple identification, like a Merlin recording, you definitely want to trim it down. But if you're targeting something, it's helpful to do it as long as possible. Audrey, I think you're up next.
Yes. Sometimes you see where the list keeper has put an X for the number of birds. Does that automatically make it an incomplete list?
No, X is okay. Again, estimates are any estimate is better than an X. An X could be 1, it could be 1 million. But if it's a list of X's, or if any of those species have an X on it, like that still tells you that bird was present. And so it is a complete list of the species you were able to identify. The question is not, are you reporting all of the individuals you saw? I believe it's, are you reporting all of the species you were able to identify? So a list of X's is still considered a complete checklist. Andrew?
Okay. What? Sorry.
Andrew Newmark has his hand up.
Yeah, same subject. I know everybody in here, I think, is pretty well versed now in the difference between incomplete and complete, but just in generally on the subject for like newer eBird users, people in general, the little information pop out that comes up, like if you're on a checklist, you say like, oh, what is this? It very strongly pushes you to say yes, which I know you guys don't have control over, but that is probably leading to the problem of so many complete checklists. It even like explicitly states like you should always answer yes unless you're purposely excluding species. Like it's very pushy on making you do a complete checklist.
Yeah, there's probably reasons for that, but yeah, I agree with that sentiment.
All right, we're getting almost to 7:30, but I'd like to just have a couple final little opinions statements, and then the same with any reviewers who there would like to finish with a parting thought or two, and then still have time just in case people are holding on to just something that hasn't been covered. Just one minor thing, and that is I'm noticing more and more it's a phone app issue, fat fingers. A lot of people, not a lot, but a fair number are submitting when it's one bird, a rarity, it comes out as two. And we have to write you back saying, did you really mean to put two? And oh my God, sorry. So please be careful when you're doing it, and please proof your numbers before you submit the list. Don't just, especially on the phone app. Anyways, a couple little opinion things I just wanted to say. One is that I've seen, because I've been around a long time, birding actively since the late 70s, that the art of writing written details is a declining art. And fewer people can write reasonable description of a bird or emphasize the characters, why it is that rarity or unexpected bird versus something else. People are relying heavily on photos. That's usually fine. But saying the bird was, in a bush or singing or hopping on the ground or it was yellow is not enough. If it's, you are the finder of some rarity or whatever, and you didn't get photos, please think of, okay, what characters did I use to identify that bird while I was in the field, not when I got home and looked it up, to tell it from a more common species that's a similar one. But anyway, that could go on for a long time. But again, the ability to write good written details, I think, is a declining ability. And in part because of the increase in good photography. And then the other comment I had is I have definite mixed feelings about some of the competitive aspects of eBirding, even if it's friendly competition, such as the top 100 listing, where you will see me prominently listed, but I think like listing always has been, whether it's eBird top 100 or you have the higher hotspot list than somebody else, or the bigger year list, it encourages sloppy birding, cutting corners, pushing a rarity when you should be thinking common species first before jumping first to next to rarity. It's wonderful to see what other people have, what they're adding. Don't get me wrong, but there is a definite downside to it. But there's been, comparative listing stats since the dawn of birding. The ABA did it before eBird came along, and it's been like that. But anyway, those are my two little editorial comments. Does any other reviewer like to finish with anything similar?
I just pulled up a stat real quick because something I look at occasionally. This month in October so far, Los Angeles County has reported 4,544 checklists, but San Diego has 4,601. So that just kind of shows you, that's, what is it, the 20th? On 21st, on average, there's, something like 200 eBird checklists being submitted every day in San Diego. So it's some of this is to make our lives easier, but also it's just for you all to, represent San Diego as strongly as possible with good eBird data for travelers that are coming here. And also when you go elsewhere, like that person's acting like this, where are they from? And they look at your profile and they're from San Diego. So This is as much for anybody as it is for the reviewers.
Just one quick thing. I think we're out of time, but if people were too bashful to ask a question or you didn't get a chance to get your question in, I at least would volunteer to, get questions by email. So if you have any burning issues or it comes to you tomorrow, feel free to shoot an email.
Okay, any other reviewer comments? Otherwise, we'll start. I mean, it's we won't go much longer. It's already 7:33. But anybody, any audience participant like just to throw out a question, a concern, a comment we can think about as well?
Yes, I have a question, Paul. This is Nancy again. What do the reviewers feel like when you get an X? Like I saw X number of coots at Santee Lakes. What that doesn't help the data at all, right?
No, just presence or absence,
It
which
helps
is
for
better than
presence
nothing.
absence. Yeah, it's better than nothing, but any estimate is better than an X. It could mean
Okay,
one, it could
great.
mean a million.
Which leads me to my question,
Oh, no.
which has an X, especially when I'm trying to go back into my days of keeping notes before eBird. I didn't really mark down how many of the species I saw. So if I'm doing a historical, or if I have times, start times and accurate locations, I don't do a historical. But
That's fine. That's fine. If you're trying to catch up on old stuff, you have no
Yeah.
idea, and you're just trying to get your list up, or just a personal
no, I'm just trying to.
X
I'm
is
just
the way
trying-
to go.
Yeah, and so my question has to do with X versus one. I mean, if I noted the species down, I saw one of them. So is there any value in one versus X is my question.
No, I mean, my understanding is you don't want to put one unless you only had one and you only had one.
Okay,
That's
so
why
you could
that's
do
why
that.
they allow the X.
So you could do that on a checklist where, like, I was in Mexico and we were floating a river and we only saw one sungreave. I could put one, but number of boat-bill herons, hell, I don't even remember. I
X, put
noted them
X.
down.
Yeah,
So
Exactly.
I just put an X.
that's
Right.
fine.
Correct.
Okay. So
All
where
right.
I
Anybody other questions, comments, concerns? Was again, we're running late, so I want to give everybody a time, free, a chance.
I have a logistical question, but it's kind of pedantic and not really important.
Love it. Let's hear it.
What kind of determines like lumping of, say, really close hotspots? Like, for example, when the Dairy Mart ponds got lumped, that was helpful. But say you've got something like when we had the Louisiana water thrush, Old Poway Park and Aubrey Park are literally across the street from each other. So the bird kept getting reported at both hotspots. With the close proximity of the two parks, why isn't that one hotspot that just kind of slashes them as combined?
Those questions come up a lot, and it's just because the optics on it. Like I didn't go to see Louisiana water thrush. I don't know where those parks are off the top of my head, but like I go to Dairy Mart Pond a lot, so I pay attention to those checklists. A lot of the hotspot stuff is Matt and I discussing them, and with others occasionally, but generally it's if people are visiting kind of both of them and there's no clear break in habitat, they probably should be lumped as one. And even if they are, you look at historic data and you realize this is all slop because field trips and people maybe from out of town are just, they walk across the street and up the hill and it's all one. It's like, well, these should probably just be one hotspot. So there's not a clear answer to give you on that question, other than if you have a concern about what should or shouldn't be a hotspot or merging, just reach out to us and start a conversation, because this is all like a community driven thing. Like you guys are the eyes on the ground. And just to extend that, like hotspot question, questionable checklist. You know, John Bruin's really good about that with the hotspot stuff. He'll find things and he's always sending me lists like this says 10 p.m. It's obviously 10 a.m. You know, and reach out to correct those things. So if you see problems with hotspots or checklists, if you don't have the ability to flag media and you find a misidentified photo, just send it to us. Happy to deal with those community suggestions.
I can answer that question about those two parks. So we asked several years ago to have those split because people would find rarities there and not specify which park they were in.
Hmm.
And so that was why we split them. I mean, why we asked to have it split. And maybe it really doesn't make sense, but they're two separate parks. There is some difference, you know, in that one has ball fields, you know, some of the trees are the same, some of it's different. You know, the creek runs through Old Poway Park. It's just the channel on the outside by the road at Aubrey Park. But it was more an issue of stuff getting reported and nobody could tell which park is it in, you know?
And that goes back to my opening statement, like record or include the location of where the bird is. That takes away all
That
of
would
that
have been
problem.
the solution.
Right, but nobody did.
That way,
So
example.
I'm in the minority. I think
Together.
there aren't any hotspots personally, and a lot of them should be lumped, but I'm the minority of the reviewers. Somebody had a question, a good one. Do us reviewers only look at the flag birds? And the answer is that's all we easily see in the review queue. There's nothing to prevent us from opening up everybody's checklist and looking at every, but we don't have time. However, there are people, some are reviewers and some are just public, who love going through every photo out there and they flag them for us. They say, this isn't right. And it's a common thing, that's not a house finch, that's a song sparrow. So it's not only the reviewers. So yes, some of your non-flagged species do get reviewed, and not only by reviewers who have time or the interest to go the extra mile, but also just by the public, fellow eBirders who now have the ability. It was a recent thing where they can flag what they believe are misidentified photos. So then the reviewers do see those.
Yeah, shout out especially to Eve Martin. She's a religious eBird flagger.
Any other questions, comments? But as Bruce said, fire some to him personally or us, and if you think of it, when we just leave and turn off in 5 minutes, and you then forget you remember something, feel free to ask.
People might need Bruce's email address if they're gonna email him.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people have, I can put it in the chat, I guess. That might be the easiest thing, but I don't know how long the chat will be up there, but
yeah,
most
if you
people have
contacted
probably-
us, then we probably have it. But
Yeah.
Yeah, just search your inbox for a question about your.
Okay, Rick, do you have a parting words?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the 5 of you for your time tonight. We owe a debt of gratitude to all the eBird reviewers, but in particular, you guys spending your evening with us and getting us on the straight and narrow. We really appreciate it. Paul, did you want to mention next month's program?
I haven't gotten full confirmation yet, but hopefully it's through eBird. There is going to be a 5-year California Breeding Bird Atlas project starting next year, like many other states have done. California is going to be a tough nut given the size and the amount of acreage. But the person in charge of that hopefully will be our speaker talking about this 5-year Breeding Bird Atlas project that you will enter your data through an eBird portal.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I dropped the link to that somewhere back up in the chat. California Birding Atlas, I think it's called. CaliforniaBirdAtlas.org.
And speaking of the chat, we've got a lot of good resources in there. Shar, would you mind clipping those and including them in the email with the link